Hi everyone, it's Monica, and welcome back to TaylorMade Cards for You. Well, today I'm here to share with you one of the stamp sets that was released last year from Stampers Anonymous, and this is one of the Tim Holtz stamp sets called Misfits. Now, last year I created some really fun Christmas cards using some ideology to attach to the eyeball, but this year I'm going to go ahead and show you another way to use this stamp set. Now, one of the things that I like to do in July, and I've been talking about this all month, is I like to get ready for card making. So while some of us may not be ready to actually put together Christmas cards, this is a good time to actually stamp out your images and color them up. We know that when we are using Copic markers or crayons or any type of coloring, that typically is what takes the most time. So if you're able to actually stamp out your images and color them up and cut them out ahead of time and maybe put them in a baggie or set aside for when you are ready to put your cards together, this is a good time to do it in the month of July. And then that way you'll have your images ready to create for the next 6 months. So that's exactly what I did. I went ahead and I stamped out some of my images and then I fussy cut them so that way we can go ahead and put together some Christmas cards. Now, if you have a stamp set like the Misfits, which has several images, it's always fun to stamp all of them out and get them ready. Even though you may not use them all, keep in mind you have 6 months before Christmas time. So you can easily, put these aside and hopefully use them in some of your projects. So don't feel like you're wasting your time if you stamp out and color extra images, because it's going to save you more time in the long run to have these ready in your stash. Now, another thing that I like to do is I like to pull out some of my Christmas die cuts, because you never know what type of scene you're going to want to create. And I know for me, at least, a lot of times I forget about my die cuts, especially some of those bigger ones, because I have them put aside on a shelf and I don't necessarily see them regularly. So this is also a good time to cut out some of the embellishments that you may be using in some of your Christmas card scenes. So what we're going to do today is we're going to create some Christmas card scenes, and we're going to be using some of our distress inks and our distress oxides to create backgrounds. Now, one of the things that I also like to do during the month of July, and actually leading up to the holidays, is I like to kind of experiment. When I sit down to make a Christmas card, it's always nice if I already have a general direction, the way that I'm going to go. I mean, we all like to play and we all like to experiment, but when you're having to sit down and create several Christmas cards, it's always nice to have an idea where you're going to go. So you can also take July as an opportunity to play around and see what's going to work for your backgrounds. Okay, so for my first card this year, I'm going to go ahead and use my stamp set called Merry Misfits. And I introduced this stamp set last Christmas. It was one of Tim Holtz's new sets that he introduced over the holidays, and I created some really fun cards, but this time I'm going to create kind of a snow scene for my Misfits, so it's a little bit different than what I did over Christmas last year. Now, the one thing that I found when I was playing around, that the best colors for me, at least, to make my winter backgrounds were Stormy Sky and Broken China. I played around a little bit with Salty Ocean, but I thought that was just a little bit too turquoise for me, and I really decided not to go that way. Now, when you are creating your backgrounds, a couple ways you can go. You can either use a brush like this, which will create a real subtle background, but I wanted to have a more blended background, so that's why I decided to actually use my blending brush. And when I'm using my blending brush, especially if I'm working with blues, I don't switch out my pad. I know everybody, is a little different, might be a little bit more protective over their inks, but if it's a blue, I just kind of use the same ink and I'm fine with that. So, go do what you feel is best. And I used to switch out my pads as well, but Tim Holtz said that he kind of just has pads for, the foams for coordinating colors. And I figured if it was good enough for him, it was good enough for me. All right, so when you're creating your snowbank, this is just something that I cut out. You just want to have some sort of a template that you can lay over your cardstock so that way you have your white snowbank. Doesn't have to be fancy, and this is also nice because then you can use this when you're blending and you won't get fingerprints. So you can go in with either color, depends on what you want. I like the more vibrant color towards the bottom of the snowbank. So I'm going to start out with the Broken China, and then Stormy Sky is what I typically will finish off my card with. So let's go ahead and just get started here. So it's nothing fancy here. I'm just going to take my template, I'm going to line it up on the bottom, and then I'm going to just start blending. Right. And like I said, with the blending tool, you're going to get a nice blended background versus a more subtle black background. And that's really what I wanted for this particular card. And I'll show you why as we kind of go in. So I'm just doing my blending here, adding my color. And as you can see, it's covering really nicely. And then I'm going to change colors here. And again, if it bothers you to contaminate your colors, then you can easily use this as an opportunity to maybe just, you know, wipe off some of that excess blue if you don't want to contaminate it. And then you can just kind of go right in. All right, so go ahead and make sure I'm lined up. And then on my Stormy Sky is where I will come in and finish off the actual sky. And when I'm finishing off the sky, you're going to find I'm going to leave white patches because I want it to look like there's clouds coming through. So I may not necessarily have it completely covered. This is just something that I do when I'm creating my skies. I like to have some of that light come through, as it normally would on a regular night, or I should say as a regular sky, because it's not going to be exactly solid. You're going to have some of that white come through. All right, so that's how I'm going to finish off mine. As you can see, I have a nice little snowbank. And when you're working with ink, it's always a good idea to have some sort of a paper towel so you don't get some of your fingerprints all over the place. So that's just a really easy snowbank scene. I just clean up some of this really quick. And then for my background, I am going to be adding a tree along with my little characters. But before I do that, I wanted to add some snowflakes. Now, I know that there are a lot of stencils out there for snowflakes, and I probably need to get one, so that's going to be on my want list. But I did have this really old stencil that's going to work fine. Now, another thing that I was doing when I was kind of playing around is I wanted to see exactly how I was going to make my snowflakes. And I really like the results I got with this texture paste matte. But if you want to go a little further and make it look like a little bit more glass, then you can always use the crackle. So either one of these would be great. I'm going to go ahead and use the crackle because I like the results. And I'm going to be using the smaller snowflakes. So I'm just using my palette knife here. And as you can see, this is very smooth, very easy to add. And I'm just going to go over my template here to add my snowflakes. Now, the one thing about using texture paste is you are going to have to give it some dry time. But like I said, I really like the way that these snowflakes look. Even though they're a little bit bigger, I kind of like the results that I'm getting. So I'm just going to add maybe one more. Let's see. But I have to be careful because this is still wet. I think I'm going to put... Now you also want to take into consideration that you are going to be adding characters on this. So some of these snowflakes may get covered anyway. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right. And this is the result that you're gonna get. So that one actually moves a little bit on me, which will be fine because it probably will get covered a little bit with my snowman. But I didn't really need a lot of snowflakes because my characters are going to be coming in here. And as you can see, these are a little bit bigger than your typical snowflakes, which I'm fine with. So I don't really need a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of put this aside and let this dry. And then we'll come back and we'll add our characters. Okay, so for video purposes, I went ahead and I used my heating tool to dry my texture paste. Ordinarily, if I'm creating backgrounds such as these, I will create my backgrounds and then I'll put my cardstock aside to dry for a few hours, and better off even overnight. So I went ahead and I used my heating tool to dry these, and when you are using your heating tool, sometimes your paper will tend to warp. So if you are using thinner paper, you're going to see a little bit more warping. But the thicker the paper, the better off you're going to see your outcome. Especially with some of the thicker mixed media paper that Tim Holtz has. I used that to cut some of my Misfits because I knew I was going to be adding water to them and coloring. So keep that in mind when you are going to be using some of the mixed media product. The thicker your cardstock, the better off you're going to be as far as warping goes. Now the first thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to go ahead and put my Christmas tree for my background. And that Christmas tree that I shared with you is a die cut. And as you can see, it's very intricate. It can easily tear, especially when you are cutting it. So you want to be careful when you're running it through your die cut machine. But once you have it out, then all you need to do is just figure out how you're going to adhere it. Now there's a few ways that you can go with this. I like to use distress collage medium because it kind of works as a paste for the most part, and you can add it to the back and over the top as well. Tonic also has a Nuvo pen that is a precision glue pen, and it's just like a ballpoint pen, and it works great for some of the smaller areas as well. So that would work with your die cut as well. But for this, I'm going to go ahead and use my Distress Collage medium. And like I said, you can not only add it to the back, but once you get it on your cardstock, you can put a layer over the top just to make sure it's not going to move. And it works really great for some of these intricate dies because you'll be able to get it completely covered front to back, and it won't move when you are putting your card together. So the way that you use this is you just get a paintbrush, and I like to use the paintbrushes that are kind of have the straight line surface. As you can see here, it's kind of a square because it picks up a lot of the Distress Collage medium really nicely, and I'm able to get full surface on it. And then once I have my Distress Collage medium on the back, then all you need to do is pick it up and then add it to your cardstock. And like I said, once you have it where you want it to go, then you can add a layer over it. Now, one thing that I want to point out is once you put this die cut on your paper, it's not going to move. So make sure you have an idea of exactly where you want it to go before you put it on the paper, because there is no movement time on this. Once it sticks, it pretty much sticks. And if you try to pull it up, you are going to end up tearing your die cut. So just be mindful of that. And then once you are finished with your paintbrush, you want to make sure that you do clean it off and wrap it in something that's wet. So maybe a paper towel or a rag, because if you keep it out too long when you're working on your surface and that paintbrush dries, then your bristles are going to get nice and hard. So you don't want to have that. So you can easily just wrap it into some a wet baby wipe, into a wet paper towel, just something wet to keep that moisture in. All right, so once you have your tree in place, like I said, you can easily take your paintbrush to put a layer over it if you wanted to do that, or if you feel that it has enough adhesive already, you can just go ahead and move on. So the next thing you're going to want to do is work with your characters. And like I said, I had cut these out ahead of time so that way I would have them ready to work for my card surface. And a lot of times when I'm working with white, like a snowman, I don't necessarily want it to be just white. I want to add some color. So I ended up adding some watercolor to it just to give it a little bit of a shadowing. And I used a mixed media cardstock because I wanted it to be a little bit heavier, as well as the mixed media watercolor. So you can go a couple of ways. If you want it to have more of a beige color, that first cardstock is good. And then if you wanted to use watercolors and have more of a white background, then the watercolor paper stock is good as well. But as you can see, I did take a little bit of that blue, and I just added some shadowing on the edges, so that way it wasn't pure white. And I really think it gives it a nice finished look. It really doesn't take much. Like I said, I used the Stormy Sky to give some of the highlights, and all I did was just put it right on my mixed media mat, take my paintbrush, and then I just added a little bit of highlights on the edge. So that's something that you can do also with your snowman if you don't want them to just be pure white. Sometimes I think it looks a little bit too perfect when you don't add some highlights. So that's something that I like to do, and it's a very easy technique as well. Okay, so for my background, I did decide to use all three characters. So you want to kind of figure out where your placement's going to be before you start adhering your characters. And when I am using multiple characters, a lot of times my characters that are going to be in the background, I'll just glue directly to my cardstock. And then the one that's in the front, I will use some sort of a pop-up. Another thing I like to do is I do like to have some sort of framing. So as you can see, I did choose to go with the green cardstock to kind of match my tree. It's always nice to have some coordinating backdrops. So you could have easily used some blue or even some brown, but I thought the green was a nice coordination with that tree. All right, so now that I know what my background is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and take my 3-in-1 beacon, and I'm going to add some adhesive to my snowman and also to my reindeer to go ahead and add them to my background. And then once I have both of those adhered, then I can go ahead and get out some of my foam dots to add my little character to the front, so that way he kind of pops up a little bit. Now, if you do have a lot of texture or some 3D items on your panel, you may want to consider gluing down your cardstock to your background first. So in other words, before you started adding your characters, maybe take some time to glue down your scene panel to that green cardstock. But as you can see, I didn't go that way, and there isn't a lot of 3D elements going on here, so I knew that it would be easy to adhere it. But that's also something to be mindful of when you are working with cards that do have some sort of 3D element. You may want to get your background in place first. And even once you know that you're going to be doing a scene, you could have easily adhered this to your white panel, which is your card base, before you started adding your characters. And it just might be a little easier for your placement as well. All right, so once I had my characters in place, then I just had a few final touches. And because I did want to go ahead and make this more of a vintage feel, I did decide to add some walnut stain to the edge of my card. So remember, if you're going to add any sort of edging or any sort of ink to the outside of your card, you're going to want to do that before you adhere it to your green cardstock. So once I had my characters in place, then I did add some walnut stain as well, just to give it a little bit more of a vintage feel. And also I like the way that it kind of adds to the cardstock to make it look a little bit like a shadow. And as you can see, the scene came out pretty nice. I was pretty happy overall. I think this is going to be a great Christmas card. Probably one of my favorites. It does take a little bit of time to put it together, but as you can see, if you do it in stages, it's really not that bad. You could easily do the characters, and store those away, and then, one day create the background and store those away. And then when you have time to sit down, just do an assembly line and put it together. It really is a fantastic card, and I think that anybody that receives this over the holidays would be in awe with it. So once I had my scene together, it was just a matter of layering the scene on the green cardstock and then adding it to the card. Now, if you are going to do a sentiment, you might want to be mindful of that. I ended up just thinking of a sentiment after the fact. I hadn't quite put the card on the cardstock yet, so I was still able to use my MISTI to add my sentiment. But keep in mind, the more texture or the more 3D effects that you have, the more difficult it might be to actually put a sentiment. So keep that in mind. But there's tons of sentiments out there that you can use in sticker form, or if you found that the MISTI wouldn't quite work, you can easily stamp this on some other white cardstock and then add it with some glue. So I hope that you enjoyed this card. It really was one of my favorites to put together. And I have a couple more videos left. I know that we have a little bit less than a week left for July. So I have a couple more projects I want to share with you before we end the month. Now remember, if you are a digital creator, everything digital is 50% off in my shop through the end of the month. So if you want to check that out, be sure to head over to tailormadecardsforyou.com. And if you've enjoyed my video today, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. Now remember, I am going to be offering some giveaways after the series ends, so make sure that you do leave a comment below, and make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, because about a week after the series ends, I'm going to be posting a winner's video, and I have lots of prizes to be giving away. So as always, I'll leave links to all the products that I've used to create this card, along with the links to the stores. And as I said, if you've enjoyed the video, I really would appreciate a thumbs up. All right, everybody, thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you again next time.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The tidings we bring to you and your kid. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy